This is me and Sally again. We're back with more sessions around learning about C Sharp, expressing ourselves through programming languages, and building end-to-end software, using C Sharp, Visual Studio, test-driven development, and all the kind of good stuff that, we've been showing you in the past 11 sessions, actually. I think it's 11 sessions by now, Sally. So,
No.
okay. Right. So so let's go to Sally Library. Let's see here our library, and let's start with, the stuff that we have going on here. So Sally, you committed almost 44 commits, straight commits into the system. You put in all the validations. Let's take a look at the validations that we have here, and let's see what that basically means. Let's go into our app service here. Let's go into books. This is validations. And then I see nice. I see you put in all the books in here: ID, title, description, author, price. You already have if ID is empty, and then the string is null or white space. Really good. And then is invalid if the number is default. You can make this lowercase because input parameters, the
Mhm.
first letter has to be lowercase. And then what's this? An integer number, default number is required. And then date is default, date is required. And then input is default for the Boolean. So this is logic answer is required. What do we have that has a Boolean though? Is it the in stock? Ah, I see. Here's an idea. We might not need to put a validation. See, that's the tricky part about these things is that in stock, it can be actually when it's created, it can come in as non-existent. We don't have it yet. We're just creating the record, but we don't
Mhm.
have it yet. So some of these validations might need a little bit of work, but let me just pull latest here and let's, go through some of the code. I'll take this as an opportunity to learn about, you created a failing test, you made it pass, and then let's talk a little bit about refactoring. Remember
Mhm.
red, green, and then blue, and then red, green, and blue. All right, so let me open up Visual Studio here real quick and let's see what we have in here. All right. I really appreciate the hard work you're putting into this. You're starting to kind of see, okay, there's validation, there's the happy path that we do, but then, in addition to this happy path is not enough. We need to go and basically say, in addition to the happy path, I need to do a little bit more work here to basically, ensure that the data that's coming in is in the right format and all that kind of good stuff. Okay. So let's go back to the code here. I'm going to pull latest from master. Let me zoom in a little bit so people can see the code that we have here. And then let's go into, so here's one thing that I usually do. You see these grayed out using
Mhm.
stuff like that. These are basically things that we really don't need in our code, or at least we don't need anymore. What
Mhm.
that basically means is it basically says, well, the stuff that you're trying to use here doesn't, the code that you have in here doesn't correlate or is not being used by anything in these references, therefore you really don't need them here. So what we can do we can do Control KE will clean up this, or you can do it project wide by doing right click, analyze code cleanup, and then run code cleanup. It'll just go across every single file in the system and clean it. So look at the changes it made in here, like in the book model, it basically took away the extra spaces. It took away so this is like configurations that basically help us write cleaner code. Basically, in
Mhm.
its essence, that's what it really is. So let me commit this as something that I call code rub. Code rub meaning code cleanup. It's basically meaning, hey, I basically just cleaned up the code. It's like rubbing glasses and stuff. You're basically cleaning up your code. I don't know if I pulled latest. Okay, so it's pull and push. So let me pull your changes first. I hope we don't end up in a conflict. And if we do, we'll fix it. Okay, so there is no conflict. Okay, now let me run the test as well. Let me increase the font here on my Windows machine just so people can see what I'm doing. So here is the 175. Here we go. I'm closing this and let me pull this to the corner here. Now the text is really, really extremely okay. So there you go. It's really large, but now you can see on the side here the stuff. And now let's run the tests. I'm gonna run all the tests in here just to make sure all the tests are in good shape. Here we go. All right, all the tests are good. Very well done, Sally. This is really solid work right there. The one thing I just want you to understand is that can you see now, like if you go into a foundation service in the validation service and you take as little as one rule, like let's say I went in here and said instead of an ID, instead of book.id, I'm gonna change one line, I'm gonna make it author or something. And if
Mm-hmm.
you run your test, ideally something should break.
Right.
There you go. Why is that? Because the code has changed. So you see how your unit tests, this is one of the most important things about the unit test because projects, as you may notice, you're gonna start having a lot of code and a lot of files. And the only way for us to know that any changes we're making, are safe and they didn't break anything in the system, the only way to do this is to basically go and say, run the unit tests. And if the unit tests come back with a good result, then that means we're in a good standing. If they fail, then that means someone has changed, the code without actually ensuring that that code change is breaking things. So far, so good.
Yep.
Okay, let's do some cleanup. So this is the validation, and then I take this opportunity to basically let people know, okay, there's multiple things that we do here when it comes to, code cleanup. Like you want to make sure that, the syntax, the language that is being used in good shape. Like I said to you, when you're passing in parameters, the first name has to always be kind of lowercase. I don't mind default. Usually I just tell people kind of put the actual default value, like for date time offset, say new date time offset, and that would make it that, but that's okay here as well. You can do that. Date is required. Go ahead. You want to say something? Go ahead.
I wasn't sure how to. I was about to write that syntax, but syntax wise, I didn't know how to do that. So
Yep, that's okay. That's why we're
yeah.
yep, that's okay. That's why we're having these sessions. We can learn and all that. So okay, so you started with the null. Also, the order here is super important. I usually just from a syntactical standpoint and from an order standpoint, if you do a peek in here, what I usually do is just I go and say peak definition, and I basically start comparing the order of validations that you have with the order like you did ID title description, author, price. See, page count, you have page count here
Mhm.
doesn't it should be the same order as the model. These things, see, everything has some thought put into it, in terms of the order of things. Okay, so release date is under page count like this, and then the ISBN is under stock, and then we're just gonna fix this a little bit so we can make sure that we actually close in on the statement like this. I think that should do the trick. So the last thing is ISBN. So you see, these are just the little things. Actually, let me go back here. Yeah, these are the little things that make our code. When someone looks at this code, they say, yeah, a really, someone who really, really care about the code quality has put in the time and effort in there to make sure things make sense, right? The same thing happens with the test. If I go back here, this session, I could call this session all about refactoring because I really want you to see, what that's like. So I can go and say ID, title, description, author, price. I think ISBN was the last one, right? We can still peek definition in here because whatever that model is, we can
Yeah.
still peek that definition. So let's go up in here and go and say, okay, this ISBN guy, let's see here. This
Should
ISBN, yeah, this whole guy here needs to
that's
go
why I
all,
should it go all the way down. The rest is in the order, I guess.
the rest is in the right order.
I guess because I wanted ISBN, I realized it's a string, so I put it on below all the string.
Uh,
With string like in the basically put them
Gotcha.
type order.
Gotcha. Okay, so the other thing here with the tabs, you want to make sure that the tabs, it's a real tab. It's like four different steps. These
Mm-hmm.
things are these things are really important because it helps the person that's reviewing your code. It trains their eyes for patterns. And when you have patterns in your code, that basically means that, it's easy for you to spot anything that's inconsistent. And this is how I'm seeing this code right now. This is how I know, oh, this needs to be fixed. Why? Because my eye immediately is seeing something that's inconsistent in the code. So you spot it right away. And it also helps, like I said, it helps with your cognitive resources, meaning that y- the amount of code that you can read is finite every day before you run out of energy and power, right? No matter how strong you are, no matter how, addicted you are to the industry, and the craft that we have, which is a great craft, craft, eventually you're gonna run out of energy to read any more code, right? And at that point in time, you have to realize and understand that the easier it is to read the code, the more pleasant it is to work with the code, the more pleasant it is to work with the people that are working on the code, the more likely that you're going to be able to go further for longer hours. And that's a really, really important aspect, especially when you're building like an enterprise level application that has almost a million lines of code, and that's not uncommon. If you're building anything serious, it's gonna hit a million lines of code so fast and so easily. So a million lines of code, if you want to go through a good portion of that, let's say maybe 2000 or something in a day, let's say you have a good team of engineers, some 8 or 10 or maybe 20 engineers, you want to be able to carry your own weight. And the only way to do that is to really, really, really care about these little things, because these little things is really what matters at the end of the day when it comes to good cleanliness and all that. Okay, you get the point. So there's that tab. Let's see what else we're missing here. We have null book, we have all of that. There's one more thing that you probably have noticed, so we already did the cleanup in here. Let's just check and make sure, the rest of this is really good, Sally. You did really, really solid work here in terms of um, running the validations and doing all that good stuff. This is all good. Okay. Wonderful. Um, where do you find these rules? Where do you find these rules of refactoring, right? How do I know, when to do two lines? Have I ever shown you the C sharp coding standard? I feel like I talked to you about that one before. Have I?
Yes, yes.
So that's basically the guide. I basically put that as a guide, and people will be able to go and say, yeah, this is the guide. We can see, okay, how are we supposed to structure our code together? Unfortunately, especially in the software industry, there's all kinds of different standards, and it's really an ocean of chaos. And, standardization tries to bring a little bit of, excuse me, a little bit of order to that chaos. And that's why we put in these standards and say, okay, let's build our code this way and let's work that way. Okay, so all of this is fine. This is all great. And I don't see anything else in here, so I'm just gonna go here and say code rub, code cleanup. So I'm just fixing variable names, fixing things. This
Maybe
is
we
all
should
good. Go
also,
ahead.
also maybe fix the modify and the adds one. So remember, so when the book service logic add in the
Hmm.
test, so we modified those to some, and the order is not the same.
Oh, good catch. Thank you for that. So let's go back into the modify. So you did the
Because
validation for the modify too? Nice. Very
yeah,
nice.
I have to fix that.
Where is the validate? No, it's not here. Are you sure you pushed it?
Yeah. Well, no logic modify. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have to?
Ooh. Oh, you
So
mean
now
this order here? Ah, that's another
order.
topic. That's another topic that we're gonna need to talk about. We're gonna talk about that in a second. Okay. So here's the deal. Oh, I noticed something also. The rest of our code doesn't have, not all our code has like the copyright stuff in it. It makes the code nice. You're working with professionals, people that are actually putting in, some rules, to how they're working, what they're doing. So this is all good. I can do this here as well temporarily. I don't like committed code, so let's get rid of all of this. No comments in our code except for, whether you're putting a copyright or you're saying given when then, or if you're building something that the source code of it is not necessarily exposed. So that's the rule for having comments. This is a very good topic. When to have comments in code? There's only three cases, right? Number one, your code consumer doesn't have access to the code within the same project. I see some people go and do this stuff. They go and say, this is add book. Oh, let me go like this and say adds a book. Completely useless comment that nobody cares about in any way, shape, or form because it literally says add book.
Mm.
right? You'll see people do that stuff and say, yeah, I'm a tough engineer. I'm adding in comments and making sure my code is documented. Absolute nonsense. Please don't do that. Instead, what I basically do here is that I say, okay, your code consumer doesn't have access to the code. What's an example of that? Example of that, when you're doing an API and you have a Swagger document. When you're building an API, you have a Swagger document. Let me show you an example of that, just so you just know what I'm talking about. When we're building APIs and we're exposing APIs to the outside world, so there's something called Swagger, and this Swagger basically shows the world like how, let me see, I think I opened like a whole bunch of these. Here's Swagger specification. I'm pretty sure I opened up like, give me a second. Swagger example. There. So this is a Swagger document. It goes and says, okay, you have the put, you have the post. I don't have access to this API, that controller that is controlling the data that's coming in and out. So it makes sense to go and say, oh, this is an ID of a pet, additional data to pass to the server, file upload. You're explaining what your API is doing because I don't see a pet object that needs to be added to the store. Understandable, right? Some of it are obvious, some of it are not, right? So it makes sense because I don't see the code that's behind this. I'm only consuming this API from the outside world. The same thing applies to library, right? Like when you have NuGet libraries, right? Or closed source in general, closed source. You're downloading a NuGet library, whether it's open source or not, it doesn't matter. Because if people are pulling in your code and they don't have immediate, this is what I'm saying, immediate access, to your code, then it doesn't make sense. It really makes a lot of sense to add in a comment in there so you know what your library is up to, what it's doing. So that's one place. Number two, when do you have to add comments to your code? The other thing is, when you're testing and regioning, right? Regioning is when you go and say, I want to make sure the given and the when and the then, so people know where is the subject of test and all that. That's
Yes.
totally okay. You can do that because you're basically going and saying, I need to separate these regions and these aspects in my test to make sure that, these aspects are in the right place, right? So there's that part. And then the third one is copyrights and notices and licenses and all that. This is like this guy at the top. This is technically a comment, right? But that comment is, it's not really a comment on the code itself, but it's something that you're leaving at the top here to tell people, what's going on and whatnot. If your code is clean enough, like some people will come at me and say, hey, Hassan, the function is too complicated. We need to explain what the function is doing. If you hear someone say that, immediately know that if your code is not easy enough to understand what it's doing by reading the code and it needs a comment, know for a fact immediately that you need to kind of refactor your code to make it more simplified. Imagine, for instance, if I go in here and say, save student and create details like this. This is a really crappy function. Why? Because I don't know what these details are. And someone will go at the top and say, hey, creates student and library card and whatever else is there, and I don't know, school card and submits book request. Yeah, of course you needed to add a comment in here because your method is doing too much, way too much work, right? Instead, if you have a function that says save student, and you have another function that says, create library card, and you have another function that says submit books request for the student, and you have another one that says create school card, right? And I'm reading your function at the top here that says submit or register student, and my register student function literally is just doing that. It's opening up like this, the scope, and it's going down here and saying, hey, create these things. That's what a student registration means to me, right? That's what a student registration mean to me. This is what a student registration means. You do these things. You won't need a comment there, right? Because you don't have to do anything. On the opposite, on the contrary, if someone goes and says, oh, this is a student, let me do this. It's like here. Yeah, here. Let me create a student, await this dot service dot add student, and then student like this, and they're passing in a student in here, and then they're going and saying, oh, await, add library card like this, and then this is student dot student ID, right? And then you're taking the card and making sure the card is in the, right place. See, it's you're starting to add in more details. When people look at your code and they see all these details in here, like you're adding library card, you're adding school card, and you're adding, maybe you have to add multiple things. So you're gonna go and do for each, right? And you say var card and cards, and I want to make sure that the card exists, right? If the student has card, right? If card dot student dot ID equal student dot ID, you go and throw an exception, throw student already has card exception like this. See, it starts to get really crappy and really complicated, and that's not healthy. See the difference between what I had before and this? So you need to write your code. These are the three rules. This is all I have, to tell the people that say I need to comment, I need to have comments on my code. If your consumer doesn't have immediate access to exposed APIs, this is on the exposer side, then go ahead and comment your API and comment your NuGet libraries and close source. Testing and regioning, copyright notices. And this is coming from me as someone who have built 36 enterprise applications, processing millions and millions of records, some of the biggest companies around the world. I'm telling you, I'm building the entire application, and I didn't need to write comments beyond this point. You don't have to, right? People come in, they understand the engineering standard, they can pick up the code and start running with it. Any questions about commenting code?
No, it's good.
All right, that's awesome. And like I said again, normally the best habit that I have is to go and take a stroll around GitHub. GitHub is full of things. Like you can go say eeny, meeny, miny, moo, and you just can go here and say you just, I don't know, dog. I'm just gonna search for dog and see all the, source code, the libraries or the code that's out there in the world that is dog and maybe written in C sharp, right? You pick up literally a random text, and you can pick up any place where there's random text, and you can go in there and start looking and saying, okay, let me look at the source code of this. What is this like? How is it working? What is this lib? What does it mean? Is it a library? Here's ask. What is this ask? What is it doing? You read other people code and you start learning. See, back again to the comments. Look. Stuff like that, right? And see how he has to. The dude has to do that because there's a lot of stuff going on here, right? And I don't know what is new as request and then enter TGT. I don't know. Maybe it's a great library. Who knows? But look, the comments and the comments and the comments and all that. It's just not a very healthy. When you zoom out a little bit at the code like this, you can
Mm,
tell, oh my holy Lord, right? This is it. And I'm not trying to kind of, put down anyone's work or any of that. I'm just saying this is how we are going to conduct, our way of writing code. So stroll around GitHub and see how people are doing it, and that should basically give you the kind of heads up, kind of
mm,
understanding of what, and I try my very best to kind of continually just, enrich our C sharp coding standard and our engineering standard with as much details as we can. So far this worked for us, but there's a lot more to add in there. So I try to make sure that these things are, up to date as much as we can. Okay. So there's that part. So the code cleanup, we already talked about the commons, so I'm just gonna throw this away. You know this off the top of your head, so you don't need that anymore, right? I think. And then, okay, so let me put that in there. And then there's other things that I have in here for you to talk about refactoring and code cleanup. As technology is evolving, Sally, you will see always in every project things like, the libraries that we're using, they continue, like the engineers that are working on these libraries that we're using, the NuGet libraries that are the foundation of our systems. If you always include that pre-release, it doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing, include
mm,
pre-release, stay on that, bleeding edge side of technology. And when you stay on that bleeding edge side of technology, you'll be able to kind of get the latest and greatest and learn about new things that are going on there. You already have the heads up about the technology that you're going to be working with. So this is really important in here. So the same thing in here, include pre-release. See, you'll find in the updates section, you'll find this stuff in here. You can go like this and just go and say update. So you basically want to keep you always as part of your refactoring and as part of your keeping your solution clean. Think about software as a house, right? It needs to stay clean. It needs to stay in a good shape. It needs to be organized, right? Think about it as a car that always needs to be clean, needs to be, you want to change the oil. You want to, make sure that, the battery is in good shape, that you have enough, gasoline, oil in the system, all of these good things that are in there. Okay, so I'm just gonna go here and say another code rub and say update libraries like this. Here we go. This is everything. There we go. Updated the libraries. What? Code rub. Update libraries. There we go. All of that stuff. Okay, perfect. Okay, the last thing I have for you, just as reviewing this, what I advise with is that I want you to go and also add the same unit test for the modify function, because the modify function only has the null validation, right? So we need something very similar to this modify function, just like we had in the add. See how you did this thing in the add here? We want to do something very similar to that in the modify. What do you think about that? Do you think that's possible? Do you think we can do that?
Of course. Yes.
All right. Mhm. So
It's straightforward. Yeah, it's very similar.
it's very, very, very similar, but soon they won't be that similar because they're going to be things that we expect to have in the modify request that shouldn't necessarily exist in the add request, and vice versa. We're going to talk about all that good stuff, and and hopefully you'll be able to learn that. So this is my session today, just refactoring, keeping your code clean. There's things like you will see me a lot, going in places like this, and I go and say, don't don't do your code like this. Some people ask me, why can't I do it like this? It's less than 122 and 20 characters. Why can't I do it like this? This is what I call a budge, like a budge. When someone has a big billy, it's hanging out of the method, and now it becomes a little bit harder. Like, if you go and do this, for instance, in here, you go and do this, something like this. It becomes really hard to kind of, you have to go back and forth, like especially for people on their laptops, they have to go back and forth like this to read your code. Normally, my rule is do not write code that's more than 120 characters, but I go and say I recommend that the code that's inside the function to stay within the realm of that function. Do you see that line here? So this is the end of your function statement, right? Everything
Mhm.
under that function should stay within that line. So see, as we go here, because when you zoom out, our code is clean. You're reading it, there is some rhythm to it, just like poetry, right? It's the exact same thing in here as well. If you go back into validations, I'll let you figure this one out on your own. See how this has a budge, it has a budge out of it. It has a little billy dangling like that. We don't want to have that, right? I want to be able to go and say, if this is validated book, then maybe all my rules, now that this became two lines, all my rules should be kind of, formed individually like that. It becomes a lot easier on the eye to read something like that. I've seen some people do this as well. I've seen someone do this. Because this is a very brand new standard that I just, introduced to the world like almost a month ago, maybe less than a month ago. I still don't have a special format in mind yet, but I think this is like my preference. So if you do it this way, look at the difference. If I'm going and refactoring like this, and you'll see this a lot. People, engineers who refactor their codes are not just employees. They're actually more than that. They're craftsmen and men and women, that actually care about how their code look like and all that kind of stuff. Even these little tiny things, see that extra space that is visible here in my IDE? I get rid of it. See, it's like this is a craft. This is something that you need to take care of. You need to kind of hone this. See the difference now? Look how our code is looking like. So this is one side, and then the previous one looked like this.
Mhm.
See the difference? You want to write your code in a way that is inviting others to read, right? And I figured some of these rules. I can't say I figured all of them, but see, I'm not even looking at what the code is saying. I'm zooming really far, and I'm
Mhm.
saying, look, even if you don't know what the code is saying, see, man, this is really clean. Look at this. Right? Versus the other stuff that, Just I just see code that basically just, increases my blood pressure just by looking at it. So let's not do that. So anyway, so that's the deal. So I'll let you do that one code rub. So these are two things for you, kind of refactor a code rub. I'm gonna let you I'm gonna let you kind of add the additional tests in here. We'll see how you're gonna make it fail pass, because the challenge for you here now is that if you just copy this test over, this test is gonna pass. Why is that? What if we copy this test over to modify? Like if I put modify here instead of add, this
Mm-hmm.
test is still gonna pass. Why is that? Because add and modify at this moment in time, they're using the exact same validate function, right?
Exactly.
So we need, if it fails at the broker when we go and say, oh, no, actually it won't. See, it passed because we didn't even touch the broker yet, right? Because of all these validation issues. So how can we have to have a failing test before we have a passing test, right? I'll let you think about how can we write a failing test for the same validation rules that the modify function has already. That's something for you to also think about, and something for the people that are following us on YouTube to
Mm.
also think about. Do you have any questions for me?
Yes. Uh, from these things are clear, but there was something I didn't. It was different for me when you run the test, like a unit test, and it
Uh-huh.
failed. You got a message that it told you you didn't draw the exception, like the actual message. So I didn't got that message. I was wondering how would I receive similar message.
Oh, when
Uh,
I changed let's see. So if I go into the function in here, the things that I did earlier, right?
yeah, before
Let's,
like that session. So my message it wasn't similar, so I was not. I mean, it said it's fail, but
let's see. If I run my test here, let's see what message it is. Oh, I hit debug. Hold on a sec. Let's see. So in here, let me go back to test and let me just stop debugging there. Let's try this again. Okay, so here we go. I'm just gonna run this. Of
I
course,
didn't.
running in debug, meaning that when it throws an exception. So there's an exception. And the exception that I'm getting here, it says I expected 9 items, but it only contained 8. Is that the message that you were talking about?
No, no, this is a similar the things I'm get, like similarly. Even
Yeah.
before we add in all these rules,
Mm-hmm.
so the first step, like first you in your unit test,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you add the validation, then you come to the book services and add this all these rules. Before that, so I just copied like the message was that message and then assert draws
Mm-hmm.
fail expect expected, but then the type of the name of the basically
The
uh,
exception.
yeah exception. Then the actual is no exception was drawn. I didn't
Oh, yeah.
that.
I mean, it's not gonna show up for all the different tests that we have, but of course, if I disable the validate for null,
Yeah,
you're gonna
exactly.
get that message. It'll say something to the effect of, check this
I'm
out.
not.
This
So
is the
the
one you're talking about. Go ahead.
message. Yeah. Yeah.
Here.
See, the message is different than mine. I will send you my message like a screenshot of that to tell you what is the difference.
Okay. So there's that, Anyway, so okay, yeah, yeah. Feel free to reach out to me about that. But other than that, you have
Yeah.
two things that you have to do. There's the refactoring part.
Mhm.
There's a part about refactoring for rules and all that, but also the failing test for modify. And we will connect again tomorrow. Sounds
Perfect.
good?
Thank you so much.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Sally. You're getting closer. If you're writing tests, you're doing it all right, so we'll see how far we can go. Ideally, by the end of this session, you'll be able to build an API and UI,
Okay.
which basically sets you up to be a very, very successful full stack engineer. Sounds good?
Thank
Good.
you.
You have a good night. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye. Bye.